Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been quite a while, hasn't it? I thought it's been long enough, so I'm gonna sit down today, gonna do my makeup, gonna talk about something true crime related, and we're gonna get back into it, have some fun. So it's been 3 months since I last made a video. A lot has happened in those 3 months. I got engaged. Anyway, I've really missed making true crime videos, so I thought I'd sit down, we do a super casual chill video, gonna do my makeup, gonna talk about something fun, if that's the right word. So I was watching this film called The Lighthouse recently, and I wanted to do a little bit of digging to find out if there were any like creepy, spooky, weird lighthouse stories, and oh boy, I found a good one. So today we're going to be talking about the unsolved mystery of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. So, the Flannan Isles, they're a small group of islands in Scotland, and they're also called the Seven Hunters. They're called the Seven Hunters because they consist of 7 small islands, also due to a large number of shipwrecks. They're like wrecked on their rocky shores during storms and stuff. So the islands have never permanently been inhabited, but it's believed they were used for private purposes by like wealthy families from the Isle of Lewis in around the 8th century. In around 990 AD, monks actually used the islands. They would build churches there and a monastery. By the 16th century, the monastery was abandoned and the isles came into the ownership of the MacLeods clan. I think that's how you say it. And then since 1970, it's been owned by the National Trust of Scotland. Yeah boy. So from as early as the 17th century, shepherds would take their sheep to graze on the Flannan Isles because they thought the islands had like superpowers. Well, not superpowers, they basically believed that the grass and the lands had like special healing powers and they were really good for the sheep. So they would take sheep, and a lot of ewes would give birth to twin lambs, and also if shepherds had like a sickly sheep, they would take it to the island and it would, you know, miraculously get better. Shepherds would never stay over on the islands, however, because they believed that they were haunted by spirits, so they would just kind of take the sheep there and leave them there for a couple of days. So the Flannan Isles Lighthouse is on a small island called Eilean Mor, and that is just off the west coast of mainland Scotland. The lighthouse was constructed between 1895 and 1899. It was built by engineer David Allen Stevenson, assisted by his brother Charles Alexander. And the lighthouse was first lit on the 7th of December 1999. Just 1 year later, a tragedy occurred that added to the mystery of these islands. Ooh. There were 4 people that worked at the lighthouse, meaning that there were always 3 people on the island at once. So they would basically work in rotation, meaning they did something like 2 weeks on, 1 week off, something like that. So in December of 1990, 3 men were sent to the island. So these 3 men were the principal keeper, James Ducat, who was 43 years old, Thomas Marshall, who was 40 years old, and Donald William MacArthur, who was 28 years old. MacArthur was just an occasional keeper. He was on duty in place of a regular member of staff. William Ross, he was on sick leave. So yeah, it's December 1990, these 3 men go to the island, and they're gonna go there, tend the islands, look after the lighthouse, all that good stuff. So the first record that something wasn't quite right on the island was on the 15th of December. There was a steamer called SS Arcta. It was on a voyage from Philadelphia to Leith, which is in Scotland. It sailed past Eilean Mor, and it noted that the lighthouse, the light wasn't working due to bad weather conditions. Well, maybe not due to bad weather conditions, but they couldn't physically see the light because of the poor weather conditions. So when the SS Arcta finally docked in Leith, which was on the 18th of December, it reported not being able to see the light to the Northern Lighthouse Board. However, there was actually a little bit of a delay in it being reported. So the idea was they were going to send a relief vessel to get the men on the island. The vessel was called Hesperus. The vessel, oh my god, this is hard to do and talk. The vessel was actually unable to leave straight away due to bad weather conditions, so it arrived on the island midday on the 26th of December. So when the Hesperus actually got to the island, the captain of the ship, he was called James Harvey, he noticed something was odd straight away because they got there and there was no flag on the flagpole. Harvey sounded the ship's horn to kind of grab anyone's attention. There was no answer, so they decided to fire a flare. Again, no answer. So the only choice they were kind of left with is they were going to have to send someone ashore to see what's going on. They sent a man ashore. He was called Joseph Moore. That's funny. Anyway, Joseph Moore, he went alone to go check out the island. Oh, Doing eyeliner and talking at the same time is so hard. So he went ashore alone, and as he was climbing up the steps, it is said that he suffered with an overwhelming sense of foreboding. When he reached the lighthouse, the gate to the lighthouse and the front door were closed, but they were unlocked. When he went inside, the beds were unmade and the clocks had stopped. The fireplace had not been lit in several days. In the kitchen, he found a half-eaten plate of food, and there was a chair that was like knocked over as if someone had jumped up in a hurry. In the entrance hall, you know, where like you keep your coats and stuff, 2 out of 3 coats were missing. There was one like waterproof coat still hung up, but 2 of them were missing. The only sign of life was the keeper's canary bird that was half starving on its perch. That bit was really interesting because I did a little bit of research into how long canary birds can live without food or water. So it can go without food for 2 or 3 days max, and water, it can literally 24 hours. If it doesn't have water, it will die. So that was very interesting to me. That made me think either the bird was really lucky and had lived more than a few days, or someone was there feeding it. Moore searched the lighthouse, but he couldn't find the men anywhere. After realising that no one was there, he went back to the boat and then returned with 2 other men, the second mate and a seaman. Upon a further search, they noticed that the lamps had been cleaned and refilled. There was no sign of the keepers anywhere in the lighthouse or on the island. They literally searched everywhere. It's only a small island, so like how far could they have gone? So the men searched everywhere. They searched every part of the island looking for clues or the missing keepers. They found nothing really suspicious. Everything was pretty intact on the east landing. However, on the west landing, they found some evidence. There had been some damage on the west landing that had been done by recent storms. So there was a box, it was 108 feet above sea level, and that had been broken and its contents had just been scattered everywhere. There were iron railings that were bent over from the force of like the weather. There was an iron railway by the path, and that had been pulled out from the concrete. And there was a rock that weighed more than a ton, and that had been moved. On top of the cliff, more than 200 feet above sea level, turf had been ripped away as far as 33 feet from the cliff edge. There had definitely been a bad storm. Upon further inspection, the damage had already been written about in the lighthouse log. The men had basically written about the storm, written about the damage, so these men had disappeared after the storm. The guy who came to shore, Moore, he basically agreed to stay, look after the lighthouse, because obviously the other men were nowhere to be seen. Can you imagine how horrible that must have been, just on your own, just looking after a lighthouse? I would be terrified. I would not do that. So a few days later, Robert Muirhead, I'm really bad with names. Robert, our good pal Rob, he was the board superintendent. He had recruited these men, he knew these men personally, they were his friends. He basically departed for the island and he was going to properly investigate the disappearances. When he got there, he didn't really find anything new that hadn't already been reported. Then he started to have a little bit of a closer look at the lighthouse log, and he found some very interesting happenings. He noticed that the last few days of entries were unusual, peculiar. On the 12th of December, Thomas Marshall wrote of severe winds which he had never seen before in 20 years. It was also said that James Ducat was very quiet, and the third assistant, William MacArthur, he was crying. Now, William MacArthur, he was a seasoned mariner, and he had a kind of a reputation as being a tough guy, so this was very out of character for him. It didn't fit his personality to be crying in a storm. He lived at sea, he was a mariner, he lived on a Scottish mainland, he was a tough, brawly guy, and he was crying because of a storm? Weird. What is also strange is that there were no reported storms in the area of the island in that period. The weather was said to be calm, and the only storms that did hit the island would have been on the 17th of December, which didn't really add up. The last record that these men left was on the morning of the 15th of December. They had chalked onto a slate the weather conditions and their daily activities. These included trimming the lighthouse lamp, filling the oil fountains, and cleaning the giant lenses. Nothing strange or amiss was mentioned. It seemed like a pretty standard day. However, on the evening of the 15th, that was when the SS Arcta passed the island, saw that the lighthouse was not operational, so it's heavily believed that the 15th was the day that they disappeared. The final entry in the lighthouse log read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." After reading the logs, Robert decided to turn his attention into the Kurtz. You know how I mentioned how 2 of the Kurtz were missing, however one of the Kurtz was still hung up. So it was December in Scotland, there was a huge storm, freezing cold. Why in the freezing winter temperatures had one of the lighthouse keepers left the warmth to venture outside without his Kurt? The only reason I can think why they would have done this is if someone was in trouble, they quickly left to help them. To add to this, why had all 3 lighthouse keepers left their post at the same time? There's a rule when you work at a lighthouse that there always has to be one person who's manning the lighthouse at all times. It can't ever be someone who's not there. Like, there are rules against this. So why? What happened? Some more clues were found on the landing platform of the island. Robert noticed that ropes were strewn all over the rocks. These ropes were usually held in a brown crate which was 70 feet above the platform on a supply crane. There was a theory that the crate had been dislodged somehow, knocked down, and the lighthouse keepers were basically attempting to retrieve it when an unexpected wave came up and just swept them all out. This was Robert's preferred theory as well. He actually wrote this up in his official report to the Northern Lighthouse Board. He wrote, "I am of the opinion that the most likely explanation of the disappearance of the men is that they had all gone down on the afternoon Saturday 15th of December, and a large body of water coming down upon them had swept them away with a resistless force." Resistless force. I said that really weird. However, some people are still unconvinced. People were thinking, for this to have happened, surely their bodies would have washed up on the shore sooner or later. Also, if this did happen, it didn't really explain why one of the Kurtz was left in the hallway, because it wouldn't really have been that much of a rush for them to leg it out. They would have put their coat on and then gone out to sort it, right? It was early December in Scotland. He would have put his coat on to go retrieve some ropes. And why would 3 experienced lighthouse keepers be taken unaware by a wave? It didn't really make sense. To add to this, the seas should have been calm too. They were sure of this because the lighthouse could be seen from the nearby Isle of Lewis, and any bad weather would have obscured the view and they would have been able to see it. So a man called Roderick Mackenzie, he lived on the Isle of Lewis. He was a gamekeeper. He was also paid £8 a year by the Northern Lighthouse Board to keep track of the lighthouse. It was his job basically to keep track of signals. If something went wrong, the lighthouse keepers would do some sort of visual signal, and it was Roderick's job to basically look out for these. Radio communications didn't work out there, so they had no choice but visual. So it was this guy's job to basically check if anything didn't seem right, keep an eye on them, and then if, you know, something wasn't right, he would then report that. It was his job to write down if he could see the lighthouse each night. So obviously when people were investigating the disappearances, they gave him a visit to see if he'd seen anything suspicious. Turns out, when people went to see him, he hadn't been able to see the lighthouse between the 7th and the 29th of December. He'd been able to see it once on the evening of the 12th of December, but then not again until the 26th. He'd been able to see the light on the lighthouse once on the 12th of December, but then not again until the 26th. And on the 26th, we know that's when Joseph Moore stayed in the lighthouse. So that was him. In fairness to him, he did say that the absence of light had worried him, but he decided to not report it to anyone. God damn it. So it actually took until 1912 for people to really indulge in the mystery of the story, and that was due to a poem written by Wilfred Wilson Gibson. Well, what a name. The poem was called Flannan Isle, and it was basically about the 3 men disappearing. It was like the story of what had happened. And that's when people really got into it and it started to really pick up some popularity. So that's all of the information and the clues that they had. They literally couldn't find anything else. They never found these men. So now onto the theories of what actually happened. Over the years, there's been a lot of theories, a lot of good ones, a lot of bad ones too. There's some talk of murder, tempers out of control, perhaps fueled by drink, isolation, madness. They were out there for quite a while, and it wasn't uncommon for people to go insane or mad on these lonely islands, especially if they were scared. If there was a really bad storm or something, they could have been driven to madness and killed each other or jumped off of the cliff. I don't know. People thought that if the weather was so bad, they could have been blown by the wind into the sea. But again, no bodies were washed ashore. If the weather was so bad, you know, they could have drifted out to sea. But from my research, it seemed like people were adamant that their bodies would wash ashore. And there's also a theory that they were abducted by aliens, but I'm not gonna talk about that. We're leaving that there. There's also a really weird one that the men were carried away by birds. There are some really big birds in the area apparently, and some people think that these big birds came and just swept them away. So a man called John Love, he got really intrigued by this case, and he would later go on to investigate the events and come up with a sort of idea of what happened. He basically concluded that there was nothing strange or out of the ordinary about this, and they had simply just been washed into the ocean. He said that 2 of the keepers had previously been fined for not storing gear properly in an earlier storm, and that must have been at the back of their minds. They didn't want to be fined again, they didn't want something bad to happen, so maybe they went out to kind of store the gear properly, but then they were washed into the sea. Instead of staying inside, if the weather got bad and they thought maybe their supplies are going to wash away, they would go outside together, 2 of them. They would make sure their equipment was safe, only to be hit by a wave and just washed out. Thomas Marshall had previously been branded negligent and fined 5 shillings after equipment was washed away during a fierce gale. Since it was not permitted for 3 men to leave the lighthouse at the same time, like I said earlier, 2 of the men must have gone down together. The 3rd person, whoever that was, must have stayed back at the lighthouse, but when his companions didn't return, perhaps he went out to look for them and got swept out, or maybe he saw like a big old wave approaching and he went out to warn them. That was why his coat wasn't there. It's not a bad theory. I think that is very possible. Something like that happened. If there was definitely storms, then I could see that happening. However, from the logs, there were storms and they knew about that. They wrote about the storms, they wrote about the damages, so they would have made sure that their supplies and their equipment was tied down safely, and I can't see them doing it a second time if it was so bad the first time. Am I making sense? What I'm trying to say is that there was already a storm, and they wrote about the storm, they wrote about the damages of the storm and how it was the worst storm they'd ever seen, and then another storm comes along and they're like, oh, maybe we should check the equipment. Like, I just feel like that wouldn't happen. I mean, it could have happened totally, but I just think it's a bit strange. And also, what I was saying about the canary, that was found on the 26th, and that was almost dead, but it wasn't quite dead, and you can't really leave canaries more than 3 days or it would be dead. So it's a very interesting scenario. Anyway, people would continue to tend the lighthouse until 1960. People who would tend the island would mention that they would see shadows and hear voices, and they thought it would be, the dead men who were speaking to them, haunting the place. In 1960, that's when it didn't need to be tended anymore. It could just be a fully functional lighthouse on its own. People didn't need to live there and look after it. So there was a film made in 2018 that was kind of based on this story. It was called The Vanishing. It's got Gerard Butler in it and some other people. I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested in the story. It's very loosely based on the story, and I mean very loosely by it's 3 men in Scotland who disappear, and the rest of it is kind of all made up. And if you've not seen The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, I would really recommend checking that out. That is a very cool film, and if you like creepy lighthouse stuff, then go for it. It's on a similar wavelength to this story. So that is the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Mystery. I'd love to hear what you all think about this. Do you think it's easily explained, they were just washed into the sea, or do you think something else happened, something a little bit more sketchy? Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I have missed making these. This has been a very, very fun one to get back into, and hopefully I can make some more videos soon. Thanks for watching. Please like this video, please subscribe if you enjoyed, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!